We'll move on to item 3, deputations and presentations, petitions and public submissions. We've received 16 requests, a total of 18 speakers requesting the opportunity to make a deputation on decriminalising sex work. The purpose of the deputations is to provide a context to item 5.2, decriminalising sex work, passed in urgent business at the Urban Planning Delegated Committee on September the 6th, 2021. As I mentioned, councillors, we've got a number of deputations this evening, and I thank all of those for their interest in this topic. And I ask that all presenters to be heard and present respectfully, understanding the diversity of the audience and also those other presenters this evening. To assist a smooth flowing meeting, I'll be writing down themes that may emerge with your presentations this evening. When a couple of themes have emerged, I'll signal to the remaining presenters that we've heard those themes come through. I will reiterate, we are here to listen to you, and at your discretion, after you've introduced yourself, feel free to indicate to me whether your deputation has been covered by a previous presenter or by the themes that have emerged, and by which you have nothing further to add. Or alternatively, you may choose to present in full. As I say, we're here to listen to you and leave that to your discretion, and we will record your views accordingly. Once I've announced your name, a member of the governance team will enable access into the meeting so that you can make your deputation. If a submitter is not present when their name is called, or a submitter experiences a technical issue, we will move on to the next speaker. Once all speakers have made their submissions, we will attempt again to hear from any speaker who has experienced technical issues. Please note, in accordance with the government's rules, you have a maximum of 3 minutes to make your deputation. And at the 2-minute mark, I will indicate to you that you have 30 seconds remaining to conclude your presentation. I'd ask that you please commence with your name and the suburb to which you reside. Thank you, Ms. Ritchie. I'll call forward our first presenter tonight, Mr. Matthew R., who will be presenting.
Yes, hello. Can everybody hear me?
Good evening, Matthew. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, yes.
That's why. If we can just commence with your name and your suburb, then commenced with your 3-minute presentation. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Matthew Roberts, and I live outside of the City of Boroondara Council.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council, for allowing me to speak today. I will be speaking on behalf of Sex Work Law Reform Victoria. I'm the policy officer there, and that's an organisation that advocates for the legal rights of sex workers. Council recently passed a motion opposing the decriminalisation of sex work. This motion hit me like a kick in the guts because I really hoped Council would understand these issues. Sex workers already live and work here in Boroondara, and we want what everyone else wants, a peaceful, harmonious community. Too often, we hear fears based on stereotypical ideas about rowdy red light district behaviour that simply don't bear out in reality. I've regularly worked as a sex worker in Boroondara, and the only nuisance my visits have caused are when one client insisted on playing Shostakovich loudly during my visits. Sex workers are also concerned about disruptive and problematic behaviour, and I'd like to take this opportunity to remind you that the people impacted the most by criminal and antisocial behaviour are other sex workers themselves. Rowdiness, drugs and violence are all matters that can and should be dealt with by existing laws that apply to all types of businesses. Decriminalising sex work also retains powerful criminal laws against human trafficking, sexual exploitation, and child abuse. Again, sex workers oppose these crimes more than anyone else because should they occur, we are most likely to be the victims. The good news is that once sex work is decriminalised, there will continue to be in place a wide range of laws to address concerns about sex work. Sex work will not be exempt from Boroondara's planning scheme. Laws relating to child welfare, illicit drugs, advertising, noise and nuisance, liquor licensing, WorkSafe Victoria, organised crime, disorderly or obscene conduct, all of these laws will continue to apply. So what about the impacts of sex work after decriminalisation,
30 seconds.
as occurred in New South Wales? There was no expansion in the size of the industry there, and there was only one complaint over 3 years in relation to the amenity impact of home-based sex work. The state government has moved beyond moral arguments and is working to tweak planning laws in a way that will work for both sex workers and the community at large. I encourage Boroondara to do the same. I'm happy to take questions of clarification, Mayor.
Thank you, Matthew, for your deputation. That was spot on time. Well done. Thank you for that. There appears to be none. Thank you for your deputation, Matthew. So we'll move on to our next presenter, which will be Ms. Cheryl Overs, Senior Research Officer, Michael Kirby Centre for Public Health and Human Rights. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Mayor. I've just had a text message from a member of the community saying that our website has not yet commenced broadcasting. I'm just wondering if officers might be able to check the status.
So, councillors, we might take a adjournment. Councillor Watson.
Happy to move the adjournment. I'm getting the same messages as well.
And seconded, Councillor Bigger. All those in favour? I declare that carried. We'll just adjourn for 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Apologies for that little technical issue there. Councillors, I'm in a search of a motion to resume the council meeting. Councillor Sinfield, seconded Councillor Park. Put that to the vote. All those in favour? I declare that carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We'll return back to deputations. Apologies for that. Our second presenter this evening is Ms. Cheryl Overs, Senior Research Fellow at Michael Kirby Centre. Thank you.
Hello, I'm hoping everybody can hear me.
We can. Thank you, Ms. Overs.
Oh, yeah. It's asking me to start video. I'm sorry. I had it before the technical hitch. Shall I just continue?
You may continue.
Oh, here's video.
Yeah,
anyway, I'll just start.
There we go. If we can just commence with your name and your suburb, followed by your 3-minute presentation. Thank you.
Yeah. My name's Cheryl Overs, and I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the Michael Kirby Centre for Public Health and Human Rights at Monash University, and I don't live in Boroondara. The Kirby Centre in 2020 conducted research for the pattern review, and we reviewed the literature on sex work in Victoria, and we modelled how the various configurations of regulations might apply after criminalisation, and we consulted with sex workers and with service providers. And not going to talk about those findings tonight, but I'm happy to answer questions about them. What I'd like to spend the next minute on is sharing one single message with you, and that is that decriminalisation and dismantling the licensing system in Victoria mustn't be misunderstood as relinquishing control or abandoning streets and neighbourhoods to prostitution in a way that local government can't handle. Rather, decriminalisation is a move away from trying to control commercial sex with ineffective laws and an ineffective licensing system to managing it with effective regulations. And regulatory authorities in Victoria govern workplace health and safety. They ensure businesses are appropriately located, open at appropriate hours, and that the right fees and wages and taxes are all paid. And decriminalisation is an opportunity to bring sex work within that framework, that effective and successful framework. In fact, many of the regulations and the other instruments that become available with decriminalisation are far more heavy or how sharper tools than the criminal law. And in fact, because Victoria, in other words, decriminalisation can be seen as not as solving the problems associated with sex work, but as lifting the lid on a toolbox that contains the tools that can solve those problems. And on that basis, I just wanted to say that there are several keys to success. I can't mention them all tonight, but some of them are things like using similar businesses to model and adapt the regulations. So whether that be a single manicurist or a large hotel or a large gym. Another one is to provide for independent sex workers, which the current law doesn't do. The current law favours large industrial type brothels and discriminates against independent sex workers.
30
and
seconds.
Of course, the third thing is to prioritise child safety and preventing gender-based violence and respecting survivors. Just finally, I want to say that because Victoria is going to be the first jurisdiction to decriminalise sex work after COVID, which means the industry's already closed down. And that's another terrific opportunity to this time get it right. Boroondara's resolution not to support decriminalisation really needs to be revised. It's going to be redundant, and I really hope you take the opportunity to do that and to get behind the opportunities that decriminalisation presents.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Overs. There appears to be we've got Councillor Franco. Questions of clarification, Councillor Franco.
Thank you. You mentioned that the current law favours larger scale organisations and that the change to decriminalisation would favour smaller operations. Could you explain what
Yes,
absolutely. How that works?
Absolutely. Currently, the only way in which sex work is legal is if it's in a brothel with a town planning permit, and those town planning permits, of course, are quite complicated, and they mean they're only viable for fairly large businesses run by a businessman or woman. And the only option to work legally in Victoria at the moment for an independent sex worker is to be an escort worker and to go out to other people's houses, which is the most dangerous form of sex work, and sex workers avoid that. So they're unable to work in an independent self-employed sex worker can't work in Victoria at the moment other than as an escort worker. She can't, or he can't have clients come to a small flat or house rented for the purpose or as a home occupation. So that is that's been the headline, I must say, for sex workers. The idea that they can work independently.
Thank you, Ms. Overs. I've got a number of hands coming up now. So I've got Councillor Sinfield, Councillor Franco. Councillor Franco, I'll allow you to have your second question there. Councillor Sinfield and then Councillor Watson.
Okay, just on child safety, you mentioned that the decriminalisation would aid child safety. I assume we're going to hear many presentations from people saying that it won't, and I'm curious why you say it will.
Well, the people who say it won't are actually being disingenuous. What they believe is that sex work is violence and it should be against people, against women, and that it should be stopped. So that's a bit like people who are against abortion saying that abortion is dangerous. It's ideological. It's not there is clear evidence about the incidence of child prostitution and child abuse in Victoria. But there's also the fact that many sex workers are mothers, are parents. So the way in which that decriminalisation will enable...
Ms. Overs, I think the question, I think you've been able to answer that question with regards to the children. Thank you for that. Councillor Franco, have you got any further questions of clarification there before I move on to...
I do have one more, but I'm happy for you to go to other councillors first.
Okay. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Mayor. My question of clarification is in relation to a point you made earlier, Ms Overs, saying that Victoria will be the first state to take this step, suggesting that the decision has already been made. Have I missed something in the correspondence here? Wondering if you could clarify.
I am assuming that it is going to happen. The Labor Party have said it's going to happen, and the Labor Party have the relevant majority. So that's my assumption. It will happen. But I didn't actually say it'll be the first state to do it. I said it'll be the first state to do it after COVID.
Thank you. No further questions from you, Councillor Sinfield. No. Councillor Watson, and then I've got Councillor Stavrou.
Thank you, Mayor. My question picks up on an item raised by Councillor Sinfield. It's my understanding, and you could perhaps clarify this if I'm not correct here, Victoria's not the first state. Could you please help me to understand what will be different in Victoria compared to when it was done in New South Wales, and it was, as far as I was have been able to find out, changed quite radically in 2015?
Well, I can't answer. There's a long history. There's two different sets of legislation. It's extremely difficult to answer that in the available time frame. There's extensive literature that compares the two states and compares their baselines and where they went. They're very different circumstances, and indeed different decades with different contexts. I'm not sure I could answer that here.
No, thank you, Ms Overs. Any further questions or clarifications, Councillor Watson?
No.
I'll move to Councillor Stavrou.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of my question, could you please elaborate whether your research is at all peer-reviewed, or it's just a research that you just do for your own think tank, or can you just qualify it a little bit?
That research was a piece of research commissioned by the Department of Consumer Affairs to provide background research to the pattern review. Having said that, I've done research that has been peer-reviewed and published for many years in various jurisdictions. I'm not sure.
No, I'm interested whether this particular research is peer-reviewed and scrutinised at all.
No, it's been scrutinised by government. It was a piece of background research for the pattern review, and it resulted in a submission to the pattern review, a commissioned submission.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stavrou. Are there any further questions, councillors? Councillor Franco.
My question related to the experience in New South Wales. It's probably more directed to the previous speaker, but you mentioned that the experience in New South Wales was positive and that there had only been one complaint.
Sorry, Councillor Franco. I'm just getting a signal from Councillor Watson. Councillor Watson, did you?
Yes, Mayor, are we going back around all the councillors to see if they have further questions, or are we going to get through all of Councillor Franco's questions at this juncture?
Councillor Watson, I did ask those councillors who did ask a question if they had any further questions, and they've all signalled no, except for Councillor Franco did say he foreshadowed one further question. Councillor Franco?
Thank you. The experience in New South Wales, was it positive, and has it been positive? And there was reference to one complaint. I think that's very low. Can you elaborate on the success or otherwise of the New South Wales experience?
I think
that's not a question of clarification. And this speaker's already said that she has limited ability to speak about New South Wales.
Yep, I accept that, Councillor Park and Councillor Franco. I think that question has been actually asked through, I think it was Councillor Sinfield or Councillor Watson. Councillor Watson. Thank you, Ms Overs, for that. Councillors, I see no further hands up for council for questions of clarification. So thank you, Ms Overs, for your presentation this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So councillors will now hear a deputation from Tegan Larin from the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women. Good evening, Tegan. Can you hear us?
Hello, yes.
That's all right. Thank you. And your microphone's a little bit soft, so if we can just get you to speak nice and loud if we can, thank you.
Sure.
And if
No
we can
problem.
commence with your name and your suburb and your 3-minute presentation. Thank you.
Sure. My name's Tegan Larin. I live outside of Boroondara Council as well. I'm speaking on behalf of the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women Australia. We're a feminist organisation working to end all forms of sexual exploitation of women, and we've been operational in Australia for over 27 years. We have been involved in the Victorian government's review into implementing full decriminalisation, and we have serious concerns about how the review has been carried out, which we do not believe has been subject to proper parliamentary process. The outcome has been decided from the start. There has been a lack of transparency around the decision making at every level, and the final report is being withheld from the public. The review excluded survivors of prostitution from participating in consultation sessions, including women with direct experience of working under decriminalised models. Additionally, the review has failed to meaningfully consult the public, both during the initial review process and during the most recent prohibitively short 10 working day consultation period. As council has noted, you were only given 2 days notice to make a submission. We believe this is unacceptable and indicates the irregular, undemocratic and frankly underhanded approach the entire review has taken. We have expressed our deep concerns about the appointment of MP Fiona Patten to carry out the review because of her long-standing links to Australia's leading adult industry body, the Eros Association, which lobbies for the deregulation of the sex industry. We see this as a conflict of interest, and the resulting proposed changes set out in the discussion paper, many that council has mentioned relating to removing restrictions on brothel locations, size, liquor licensing, advertising, etc., confirm our concerns that blanket deregulation for the interests of sex industry business profits has been prioritised over concerns for women's health and well-being. The stated aims of these drastic changes are to treat sex work as a business like any other, but it isn't like any other business. No other business requires sexual contact. This is a highly distinct and gendered industry with a history of particular and extreme harms, including human trafficking, sexual and labour exploitation, and the involvement of organised crime, none of which have been properly considered. The proposed changes are irresponsible and, in our opinion, increase the opportunity for exploitation. Finally, I'd like to bring the council's attention to a global petition against Victoria's decision to implement full decriminalisation, signed by American feminist Gloria Steinem and over 200 survivors of sex trafficking and prostitution, as well as human rights advocates from around the world. We believe this international condemnation indicates just how extreme and out of step with the rest of the world Victoria's proposed changes are. It's for these reasons I want to express Catla's support for the motion and thank council for its public advocacy on this matter. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms Larin, for your presentation this evening. Councillors, are there any questions of clarification? There are none. Thank you, Ms Larin. Sorry, Councillor Watson, I did see your hand. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your presentation. My question is about decriminalisation. So we know that the headline is not the whole story, and you drew attention to the fact that there are strong links between organised crime and sex work. In your opinion, how will decriminalising sex work remove the criminal element from this particular activity?
That's a really good question. That's one that we put to the review ourselves. We know that organised crime already exists under a supposedly highly regulated legalised model. How will removing any of those regulations increase scrutiny and reduce organised crime when we know it already happens? We know it happens in New South Wales under decriminalised model, in New Zealand. So yeah, I'm not sure how that's supposed to work either.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillors, any further hands? There appears to be none. Thank you, Ms. Larin, for your presentation to us this evening. Thank you. So we'll move on to our fourth presenter, Mr. Fred Ackerman, former President of the Victorian Principals Association. Good evening, Mr. Ackerman.
Okay, I'm trying to get in. Mute video. Start my video. Thanks.
Good evening, Mr. Ackerman. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, I can indeed. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you
Sorry
for
about
your presentation this evening. If we can just commence with your name and followed by your suburb plus your 3-minute presentation. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, councillors. So I'm Fred Ackerman and I do not live in the City of Boroondara. I make my deputation as a former teacher, school principal, president of the Victorian Principals Association, and a former senior manager of programs and partnerships within the Education Department. As an educator then, I'm concerned regarding amending the planning controls for the sex industry through the through decriminalising the sex industry in Victoria. I'm particularly concerned regarding the aspects of sex work business able to operate rather in residential zones and sex workers able to operate a home-based business. So my concerns are particularly around the planning aspects, planning and controls, and local amenity. Educators then are concerned that the neighbourhood amenity be preserved, whereby children can attend kindergarten and schools in what we call a traditional, safe, family-friendly environment. While accepting that facilities that provide adult services such as massage parlours and so on will exist, it is not appropriate that such adult services, we believe, be located in school local neighbourhoods. Unfortunately, the adult services industry by reputation tends to attract some individuals whom parents, teachers, principals and community members would have grave and warranted concerns about them being in the proximity of our kindergartens, schools and young people. I'm happy to respond to any questions that the councillors may have.
Thank you, Mr. Ackerman, for your presentation. Councillors, any questions of clarification? Councillor Franco.
Why will decriminalisation result in sex industry premises adjacent to kindergartens and the like, given the government's announcement and clarification in relation to the proposal?
My understanding is that planning applications and so on would be considered by local council, but of course it's likely that such applications could be appealed, and I don't believe there is sufficient clarity about the ability of councils to restrict where services, particularly home-based services, may be located.
Is that a basis for opposing decriminalisation?
A basis for...
Point of order, Chair. This isn't meant to be a debate. Councillors don't have the ability to engage in a debate with submitters. We're here to listen, and that councillor well knows that. I'm
not debating, I was asking questions.
You are debating.
They were questions.
Okay, councillors. Councillor Franco, do you wish to rephrase your question or clarification?
I'd like the question to stand, but...
It's argumentative, and that's not a question of clarification. You need to rule on it, Chair.
All right, I'm going to... Councillor Franco, I'm going to not allow that question. If you want to rephrase that question in a different way. so as not to draw into Mr. Ackerman into debate.
Okay, I'll rephrase it. If the issue is purely one of whether councils would approve sex industry premises in particular locations, then that is a very limited and specific concern, which our motion is one that poses decriminalisation on a range of fronts. So there's a slight inconsistency perhaps, and I just wanted to draw out that understanding that this is a very limited concern compared to the broader function.
Councillor Franco, where's your question in that?
Well, does the Speaker recognise that this is a very limited sense of objection?
Councillor Franco, that's drawing the Speaker into debate again, so I won't allow that question. I'll go to Councillor Stavrou.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Ackerman. Just a question. It's been said before in these deputations and in other forums that the sex work is a profession like any other profession. And in your experience as an educator, I would like to know whether in any career advice in any of the schools that you know, whether that has actually been put as an option.
No.
Thank you.
Okay, councillors, any further questions of clarification? Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Ackerman. Drawing on your experience as an educator, if a brothel or a sex work establishment was to locate next to a school, what sort of problems would you foresee if you were the principal of that school?
Councillor Watson, that's asking for further questions of clarification on what Mr. Ackerman's presented. If you've got a question of clarification, please ask a question of clarification.
I'll leave my question there.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Any further questions of clarification? Mr. Ackerman, thank you for your presentation this evening. We'll call upon our fifth presenter this evening, Mr. Bihong Wang, on behalf of the Rima Chinese Christian Church of Melbourne. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. Ms. Bihong Wang,
yep.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for
That's
having me, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, you did pronounce my name right. My name is Bihong Wang, and I'm from Rima Chinese Christian Church here at Boroondara North. So we do locate within the Boroondara Council.
Thank you. If we can just commence, thank you for your introduction. If we can commence with your 3-minute presentation. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity for me to address Council this evening on behalf of my community regarding the motion recently passed by Boroondara Council. We wish to express our concerns for the impact that the decriminalisation of sex work in Victoria will have on our safety and amenity. Many of my community have chosen to live or migrate to Australia because it is a place of love, peace, and safety. Australia is a country founded by Christianity, and it is a land that flows with milk and honey given by God. This brings us hopes and a sense of security. We feel that the decriminalisation of the sex work in Victoria and the changes of planning will gravely detrimental to the quality of life we come here seeking for ourselves and as well as our families. We also regret that our faith has not been respected in this manner. We strongly oppose the dismantling of the existing sex work licensing and registration system that requires there to be separations and distance between sex work business to our school, our kindergarten, our childcare, and our homes, as well as our churches. We also strongly oppose allowing brothels, which are commercial sex workers' business, to operate in the shopping centre and residential areas under any circumstance. We also strongly oppose brothels being allowed to not only establish themselves in our neighbourhoods, but also to be able to apply for the liquor license. Many in our community work hard to buy a home in a safe neighbourhood where we can live confident that our children can walk up to the park, play in our front gardens, and walk to the school. Allowing brothels to operate in our neighborhoods destroys that confidence. There have been many parliamentary inquiries which have consistently reported that there is a strong correlation between the sex work industry and organized crime. The decriminalisation of the sex work industry does not automatically expel the criminal elements that use this industry for human trafficking, the sales of illicit drugs, and the firearm offences. We do not want these criminal elements introduced into our neighborhoods. We are appalled that the state government will not conduct meaningful consultation with Victoria communities and with our local government representatives. We live in a democracy and
30
demanding
seconds.
us the right to have the voice and raise our concerns on matters which impact on our public safety, amenity, and well-being is unacceptable. I'm grateful that I have heard the opportunities to be heard this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wang, for your presentation this evening. Questions? Any questions of clarification of Ms. Wang? There appears to be none. Thank you, Ms. Wang, for your presentation. For the benefit of the councillors and also the community, it might be worth reminding everyone that council has not said anything about the desirability of sex work. Our previous motion that was passed raises concerns about the amenity impacts as a consequence of the legislation, just to clarify that for everyone who's listening this evening. We're starting to get a few themes also come through: lack of consultation, potential link with crime, and also concerns with the planning aspects and amenity aspects. So for our future presenters, just can keep those in mind. I'll call forward our next presenter this evening is Father Nicholas Georgiou from the Greek Orthodox Parish. He's Greek Orthodox Parish priest from the presentation of Our Lady of the Temple in North Balwyn. Good evening, Father Georgiou.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay.
We can. You're a little bit faint, Father. If you can just speak nice and loud, and if we can commence with your name, and obviously we know you're in North Balwyn, and your 3-minute presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Father Nicholas Georgiou. On behalf of the Greek Orthodox Church, I wish to make my formal statement on the proposal to decriminalise sex work in Victoria. In doing so, I represent many thousands within the local government area, and I am grateful for the opportunity that has been granted to me to make this representation to Council. As a church, we have at heart the interest of the entire community, and I seek your indulgence to make a few points on this topic. In the context of topic of sex workers, it is important that no stigma is attached to any person. The view of the church is simple and straightforward. It is the action and not the person that is condemned. We are greatly concerned about the implications of introducing the proposed legislative changes, and to save time, I will focus only on a few points. We agree with many submissions to government that the ability for a brothel to set up as a home-based business in any residential dwelling, in any residential street, is a most serious concern. Firstly, it will have a significant adverse impact on residential neighbourhoods beyond that which is imagined on paper. Secondly, there are implications for the families, especially the women and children who are nearby. Innocent, impressionable, trusting, pure children playing in the front yard next door to a home-based business with signage and a continuous flow of patrons who park in front of their home. Imagine the possible complications. Thirdly, the possible removal of the current 200-metre distance required for sex work premises to be located away from schools and places of worship is deeply troubling. These legislative changes will contribute to the normalisation of an industry known for exploitation and harm. and at a time where there is much concern about the issue of sexual harassment of women, such changes would be retrograde and step back and should be rejected. We also have concerns about this form of a moral standpoint. We realise that there are diverse views in the community, but we would point out respectfully that most community members would share our stance on the matter of prostitution.
30 seconds.
Clearly, it is important to ensure the safety, health, and human rights of workers of all occupations, but it is not appropriate to widen the already extensive sex business network that exists. Extending into the residential area is strongly opposed by the Greek Orthodox Church. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Giorgio. Councillors, any questions of clarification? There appears to be none. Thank you, Father Giorgio, for your presentation this evening.
Sure.
We'll move on to our seventh presenter, Mr. Paul Dipnell, President of the Boroondara Residents Action Group. Mr. Dipnell, are you online? Good evening, Mr. Dipnell. Appears we might have some audio and visual problems with Mr. Dipnell. Can you hear me, Mr. Dipnell? And Mr. Dipnell's gone. So what we'll do, councillors, we'll move on to our next presenter. We'll come back to Mr. Dipnell.
Mr. Dipnell's there. I can see him.
Oh, he is. Good evening, Mr. Dipnell. If we can just commence with your name and your suburb, followed by your 3-minute presentation. Thank you. Mr. Dipnell, we can't hear you at the moment. No, still can't hear you, Mr. Dipnell. What we might do, councillors, whilst our officers assist Mr. Dipnell, we might move on to our next presenter. Unless, have you got your audio working, Mr. Dipnell? No, appears not. We'll move on to our next presenter, who is Mr. James Bay on behalf of the Korean Society of Victoria. So we'll move on to actually Miss Grace Bay, who is a Korean immigrant. What are we doing? Number 9 is, I'll just double check with governance, is Miss Grace Bay. Miss Liz Chen. Is Miss Liz Chen here? Apologies, councillors. Good evening, Miss Chen.
I have been, can you hear me?
I can, thank you. If we can just commence with your name, your suburb and your 3-minute presentation. Thank you.
My name is Liz Chen and I live in North Balwyn.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Myself, and along with my family, have been residents of Boroondara for over 30 years. In fact, from as long as Melbourne has actually won its last premiership, so quite a long time. Raised a family and actively involved in many areas, sports and groups within the community throughout this time. We are very concerned and fully and strongly support the response from the Boroondara and other councils requesting an extension to the consultation period for the proposal to decriminalise sex work in Victoria. The time available for council 2 days before submissions close is severely insufficient and inadequate to allow any effective or efficient consideration to plan for the future, considering the full scope of this proposal and the community impact this will have. So why am I personally speaking today? For over 15 years, we have supported CamCare within Boroondara for the care and support of vulnerable and disadvantaged folk in our community. The HOPE program since its first initiation 6 or 7 years ago, and for the last 9 years have actively supported the Ping Pongathon, which raises awareness of and has implemented programs throughout Southeast Asia where young people and youth are entrapped, enslaved, trafficked and exploited within a deregulated sex industry. Having been exposed to the destruction and degradation of people's lives through the amazing work that the Ping Pongathon does, we are extremely aware of and mindful of the impact that a deregulated, decriminalised sex industry can have on the lives of others. Additionally, these last couple of years, there have been significant public, media and global awareness of the objectification, sexualisation and abuse of women within our communities and workplaces across all socio-economic levels, where power imbalances and control have significantly impacted the lives of others. This has also been heightened through the recent investigations in issues like the Maxwell Epstein exposure, Athlete A and the abuse of young gymnasts from Larry Nassar in US, and the prevalence and accessibility of pornography, just to name a few. This is not going away. The impact is significant, and the level of cover-up, secrecy, promises, perception of safety and acceptability, where there is ongoing facade of gratification and abuse.
30 seconds.
Every female and male has the right to be financially independent and able to control their future through choice and vocation. Every effort needs to be made to support those who are exploited and entrapped beyond the current sex industry and to provide them with options for a future beyond the industry. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms Chen, for your presentation this evening. Councillors, any questions of clarification? There appears to be none. Thank you, Ms Chen, for your presentation this evening. I believe I skipped over Professor Frank Rosenfeld. We'll just see if we can bring Professor Rosenfeld forward. Good evening, Professor.
Good evening.
If we can just commence with your name and your suburb and your 3-minute presentation. Thank you.
Frank Rosenfeld, long-standing resident of North Boroondara. I wish to thank the... Can you see me?
Can't see you, but we can hear you.
I'm starting my video. No. Anyway, I wish to thank the Council for the opportunity to speak about the proposed planning controls for the sex work industry in Victoria. I'm speaking as a semi-retired medical scientist and surgeon, as a Boroondara resident, as a citizen of Victoria, and behalf of the Christian churches of North Boroondara. Last week I became aware that the Boroondara Council was seeking an extension to the consultation period for the proposal to decriminalise sex work in Victoria. I noted that the Boroondara, Glenara and Stonington councils had received advice from the state government of the proposed new legislation only 2 days before the closure of the consultation period. This caused me to read carefully the discussion paper posted on the Victorian Government website. On reading the proposal, I became concerned about many aspects of the proposed legislation. While I realised that sex workers are often victims of trafficking, violence and other forms of abuse and exploitation, are in need of effective legal protection, I discovered that there are many areas of concern in the proposed revision of the Sex Work Act of 1994, These revisions go way beyond the health and welfare needs of sex workers, particularly in the proposal to allow sex work businesses to be no longer prohibited from certain localities in Boroondara, and that they may operate in commercial and residential zones, much like any other business. Also, it is proposed that they may operate from residential homes as a business without requirement for a permit. I feel strongly that these issues merit thorough consideration and discussion by the community across Victoria and in the Boroondara area in particular. The three councils received advice of these major changes in the legislation only 2 days prior to close of submissions. They then advised the relevant minister that 2 days is a grossly inadequate period of consultation and that a minimum consultation period of 6 to 8 weeks could provide genuine and meaningful dialogue so that a reasonable and balanced approach could be taken to any changes in the legislation. Overall, the decriminalisation of sex work businesses will result in shifting the cost, responsibility and
30 seconds
to local government, and the impact to councils in these communities is likely to be significant. At a recent meeting of the Council of Churches of North Balwyn, supported the request by Boroondara Council for a consultation period of 6 to 8 weeks so that members can discuss this matter with their respective church communities. I conclude by strongly backing the request by the 3 local councils for a minimum 6-week consultation period. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Councillors, any questions of clarification from Professor? There being none, and we do see you on the screen now. So thank you for your presentation this evening, Professor.
Thank you.
We'll move on to, I'm just seeking governance advice. Have we got any of those earlier presenters? Thank you, councillors. So we'll go to our next presenter, Miss Yolanda Teresi, Marketing Coordinator of the Greythorn Shopping Centre. Good evening, Ms. Teresi. Good evening. If we can just get you to speak nice and loud into your microphone, it's a little bit soft.
Okay. So my name is Yolanda Teresi. I am a Balwyn resident and also am the marketing coordinator for the Greythorn Central businesses.
Thank you. If you can commence with your 3-minute presentation, thank you.
So Greythorn Central is already concerned about prostitution activities in our community. While the decriminalisation is one matter, what we are gravely concerned about are the changes to the planning laws, which will allow this business service to operate in our shopping and residential neighbourhoods. The service should and must remain licensed and be strictly managed. There is no doubt the delivery of this service is associated with illicit drugs, persons of questionable character, organised crime, and flies in the face of the moral code of a respectable society. As a businesswoman with a number of business interests, I can't go and set up a manufacturing plant in my suburb of Balwyn because it's zoned residential, not industrial. I cannot undertake some parts of my business activities because it's strictly controlled by laws which protect my neighbourhood. I can't sell industrial chemicals from my home because they are strictly licensed. The same should be for sex work. It must remain licensed and a registration system must stay in place. Sex workers must only be allowed to conduct their business in locations that are strictly zoned for sex work, and premises need to be registered. It must never be allowed to proliferate on our streets without strong control on where these businesses can set up. The reasons are to maintain safety and the amenity of our neighbourhoods. It is a service that attracts the dark side of life and therefore requires significant controls to keep everyone safe. It is unacceptable for sex work schools and moral civil society to coexist, and breaks down the moral framework of an ordered society. We can't have sex work being conducted in areas where families and children gather in shopping centres and residential areas. We cannot have sex workers soliciting in our residential neighbourhoods, as it brings an unsafe element to our streets. There is a vast difference between having a sign on a residential home touting ironing and mending services and one that says sexual services. This is just wrong. Under the new code, such a sign could appear on a home-based business. This is strongly opposed. We strongly oppose allowing sex workers to operate home-based businesses and in our residential shopping centres under the same planning controls as any other home-based business. Look at the numerous reports that have been released. Sex work and organised crime are highly interconnected. Is
30
this
seconds.
what we want in our neighbourhoods? Sex services must remain registered and controlled service for the protection of both those working in the sex industry and for the general community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Terizzi, for your presentation. There appears to be no hands up, so thank you for your presentation this evening. We'll move on to our next presenter, excuse me, Mr. Russell Gray. Good evening, Mr. Gray.
Good evening.
If we can just commence with your name and your suburb, followed by your 3-minute presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Russell Gray, Surrey Hills, a parent and long-term resident. Good evening. I thank the Council for being proactive in opposing the state proposed legislation to change the sex workers legislation. I'm opposed to any legislation that is aimed at benefiting a minority of our society and result in the penalising of the vast majority, such as this proposed sex work legislation would. If this government legislation is passed, the only consequences for the Boroondara Council and its residents will, in my opinion, be negative for the following reasons. Children will then be exposed face-to-face with the sex work industry by signage and other promotion. By being confronted with street-based sex workers and their customers, because there'll be little control over the separation distances from preschools, kindergarten, schools, places of worship and homes. Shifting the enforcement of regulations relating to sex work onto local councils. How can all these new rules be policed by council officers when sex workers would be any and everywhere within the community? Allowing commercial sex work businesses to operate in commercial and residential zones, e.g. in any of our shopping malls and strips. Allowing signage and advertising for sex work businesses, including in residential areas. Allowing sex workers to operate home-based businesses, potentially next door to my home. A sex worker operating a home-based business would not need a planning permit. Any organisation with premises for renting and leasing will not be able to refuse people who want to openly engage in sex work activity on the grounds of discrimination, it then being a lawful activity. Airbnb properties will be in high demand. Community health issues. This will result in sex workers no longer being required to undergo mandatory sexual health testing, nor will there be criminal repercussions for failing to practice safer sex. Potential further impacts on our residents. It will encourage the illegal human trafficking, as we've heard, for sex work due to the resultant increased demand, increase the use of drugs by the sex workers to cope with the demands of their long-term work, drug users being forced into more readily available sex work to pay for their drug use, increase the potential for criminal elements to control the independent sex workers.
30 seconds.
Create more mental health issues for sex workers due to the nature of the work. Encourage the transitioning from pornography to prostitution of our community due to the vastly increased availability of sex workers. And the justification for the previous legalising of brothels was to overcome the majority of the above negatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. There appears to be no questions from councillors, so thank you for your presentation this evening.
Thank you.
So we'll move to our next presenter this evening, Ms. Caitlin Roper, Campaigns Manager, Collective Shout. Good evening, Ms. Roper.
Good evening.
If we can just commence with your name, your suburb and your 3-minute presentation. Thank you.
My name is Caitlin Roper and I'm outside of the council area. Thank you, councillors, for this opportunity to
Ms. Roper, what we might do
today.
Ms. Roper, can you hear me?
As I've said, my name is Caitlin Roper.
Ms. Roper, can you hear me at the moment? Just what we might do, because it sounds like you've got a little bit of a bandwidth issue, if you're happy to turn off your video, we might just try your audio only.
Yes, can you hear me?
Thank you. That's better, thank you.
Yes.
You there, Ms. Roper? Yep. If you can commence with your presentation, thank you.
Yes. My name is Caitlin Roper and I'm speaking on behalf of Collective Shout, a grassroots campaigning movement against the objectification of women and sexualisation of girls, and more broadly, violence against women, pornography, prostitution and trafficking. We have expertise in the sexual exploitation of women in Australia and globally, and our work is informed by survivors of the global sex trade. Decriminalising the purchase of sex, as the Victorian government has done, legitimises men's right to buy women for sexual gratification. This harms not just the women they purchase in the industry, but women outside of it too. Women in the sex trade are routinely subjected to violence, rape, abuse and harassment by the abusive men who pay for sexual access to their bodies. But this violence is not contained in brothels or limited to women in the industry. It spills out into the wider community, putting all women at risk. Research in Victoria has found that sex industry venues create an environment that is unsafe for women, placing them at increased risk of violence. Melbourne women reported increased incidents of sexual harassment, abuse and violence in areas in close proximity to sex industry venues, and that they were afraid to walk home at night after being subjected to drunken abuse from male customers. The elimination of restrictions on sex industry related advertising will also have significant negative impacts to women and girls by normalising the sexual objectification of women as commodities to be bought and sold for men's sexual gratification. According to the Australian Human Rights Commission, unwanted exposure to sexualised content constitutes sexual harassment. We've long argued that sexist and sexually objectifying representations of women in the public space create a hostile and discriminatory environment for women and should be treated as threats to the health, well-being and status of women and girls. There's decades of empirical research to support our view, with sexualising and objectifying treatment linked with violence against women and leading both women and men to have a diminished view of women's competence, morality and humanity. There's also the potential for advertising in the public space, which serves to recruit women and girls into the sex industry. Due to COVID and many women are at greater financial insecurity, many women are now particularly vulnerable to being recruited into the sex industry, an industry known to prey on women's vulnerability in the wake of natural disasters and other crises. I'll leave it there, but I'd be happy to share our submissions on this or any of the research I've cited with the council.
Thank you, Ms. Roper. We have a question of clarification from Councillor Franco.
Thanks, Caitlin. You correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you've stated that you were against decriminalisation.
That's correct.
Yes, and in your presentation, you indicated that under the current arrangements, women were at risk of violence and in a vulnerable situation under the current arrangements. Yet that I don't see, therefore, why you are necessarily opposed to changes that seek to address that very concern. At least that concern is presented by some of the other speakers today. So, because it doesn't sound like you're in favour of the current arrangements, but in opposing the reforms, you seem to lapse back to the current arrangements. I'm curious how you justify your thinking or how that comes out.
Certainly. Well, we would argue that legalisation and decriminalisation are two sides of the same coin. They are both legitimising men's sexual use of the bodies of women and girls. And so we would call for a different approach, the Nordic equality model, which decriminalises the sellers, but criminalises their exploiters. So the men who pay to use their bodies and the pimps who profit from their sale.
And that would effectively make the current legal brothels illegal effectively. Is that correct?
Yes, it would criminalise brothel keepers as well.
Thank you, Councillor Franco. Any other questions of clarification from councillors? There appears not. Thank you, Mr. Roper, for your presentation this evening.
Thank you.
So we've got a number of themes coming through, links with crime, lack of consultation, appropriateness of locations and those sorts of things. So for our future presenters, you might just keep those in the back of your mind if you think previous presenters have already touched on what you're going to present. Our next presenter is Miss Priscilla Milado. Good evening, Miss Milado.
Hello.
If we can commence with your name and your address, your name and your suburb, followed by your 3-minute presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Priscilla Milado and I live in Glen Iris, so I'm a resident.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to address Council this evening on behalf of my community regarding the motion recently passed by Boroondara Council. I wish to express my concern for the impact that the decriminalisation of sex work in Victoria will have on our safety and amenity. I have lived in the City of Boroondara for the last 35 years. I have attended schools in Boroondara as I was growing up, and I am now a mum raising children in this area. I've never felt unsafe in the City of Boroondara, no matter where I have walked, day or night. In our area, children play in the streets, they ride their bikes to see friends, they draw with chalk on their pavements outside their houses. They walk with their friends after dark, and as they get older, they come home late at night and they walk up their streets, all without fear of harm by anything other than a speeding car. Our elderly parents walk around the local streets enjoying the amenity of the area, safe in the knowledge that they are surrounded by like-minded people who live in the area and value the safety of the neighbourhood. Enabling sex work to occur in any house, in any street in the City of Boroondara changes everything. On the bottom of the Boroondara Council emails, it says, "Help keep our community safe and healthy." Sex work in residential homes in this City of Boroondara does not mean a safe neighbourhood. Parked cars in residential streets with customers waiting to go into a house or leaving a house changes the safety of our streets. Having special regulations for areas near schools and childcare centres does not make the situation any safer. Our homes are our childcare centres, 24 hours a day, weekdays and weekends. We live here. These are our homes. Sex workers in the house next door to our families is not creating a safe neighbourhood. So on behalf of the community, I support Council's motion to oppose the sex work legislation to protect the wellbeing of the residents, the families, the children and the elderly people living in the City of Boroondara. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Milado. Councillors, any questions of clarification? There appears none. Thank you for your presentation to us this evening. Thank you. We'll move on to our next presenter, Jolyon Edwards from the cleaning shop in Kew. Good evening. Are you there, Jolyon?
Can you hear me?
I can indeed, thank you. If we can just commence with your name, we know your suburbs in Kew and your 3-minute presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Jolyon Edwards and I've run the cleaning shop in High Street, Kew for 30 years. And I wish to speak tonight in relation to this, the decriminalisation of sex workers on the street. And I just wanted to share some thoughts. And I've worked in High Street, as I said, for 30 years, and nothing has, I've gained a lot of joy from watching children walk to Kew Primary School, Sacred Heart around in Cotham Road. And I've watched children grow up into young adults because I've been there that long. And I just wondered, you know, how they'd feel if this activity had to be witnessed by these young people. But I want to tell a story, and this is actually fact. In the late 1990s, at the Clifton Clifton Hotel in Kew Junction, the then publican was actually bringing in Thai prostitutes from overseas, and this is all recorded in court documents. And they were being used to supply various brothels. And I just could not believe one of the ladies actually escaped from the back and climbed down a tree to go to the authorities. And I just couldn't believe this occurred in Kew Junction. And basically, it was organised crime, and this publican had contacts in Thailand, and he would pay between $15,000 and $18,000 for each prostitute and bring them over here, and they were effectively indebted to him and had to work to pay back the debt. And I've often wondered how they felt being in a different country doing this activity. I'm the father of 2 daughters, and I'd just be shocked about this, you know. And here's the thing, right? I just wonder how and where these women, how they ended up in life. Now that was 30 years ago. You know, did some of them suicide? Did some of them end up with STDs? And this is human trafficking at its worst. And this is not an episode of NYPD Blue or Law and Order. This actually occurred in the city of Boroondara. And what would happen now with organised crime like that if these new rules did actually come into play? You know, the Victorian government tells me they're committed to gender equality and combating violence against women. But viewed through this lens, the full decriminalisation of the sex industry is totally inconsistent to me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Councillors, any questions of Mr. Edwards? Councillor Franco.
Thanks, Mr. Edwards. Are you suggesting that the current policy drive to decriminalisation would allow illegal human trafficking or promote illegal human trafficking? Because that's certainly not anywhere in any of the proposals I've read, at least, and not supported by anyone in the government. So I welcome the story that you've told, but I don't see how it relates to the current policy position, because I can't see anyone advocating.
Councillor Park.
Chair, again, that's the way that's phrased. It's argumentative and disrespectful. It shouldn't be allowed.
Councillor Franco, if you can just rephrase that question, because it is part of what Mr. Edwards was presenting on.
Your presentation, Mr. Edwards, talks about an incident in illegal human trafficking, which most people overwhelmingly would find objectionable. I don't see how it relates to the current proposal of decriminalisation, other than to unfairly.
That's the question.
So in my simple, uneducated opinion, I see a direct correlation between prostitution and organised crime. This actually happened in the city of Boroondara, the same city in which you're a councillor in, right? 30 years ago. You can go to court documents and it's all there. And there's actually been many papers written about this case, the impact on these women. And that's why I'm speaking tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. There appears to be no further hands, so thank you, Mr. Edwards, for your presentation this evening. We'll move forward to our next presenter, Ms. Simone Watson, Director of Equality Model Australian Coalition. Just remind councillors not to do a preamble before putting in a question. Sorry, apologies, councillor. We're actually going to move to Ms. Caroline Norma. Good evening, Ms. Norma.
Evening, thank you very much. My name's Caroline Norma. I live in Northcote, so I'm outside of the council jurisdiction. I'm a senior lecturer at RMIT University in Melbourne and have been researching and campaigning against the sex industry for 20 years. I commend council members for the motion passed last week and sympathise with the position local government now finds itself in Victoria, where you will be made responsible for problems caused by the sex industry that the state government has failed over decades to solve. Instead of tackling the Asian massage parlour problem and the syndicates that operate them throughout Melbourne, the state government will deregulate the sex industry with a repeal bill later this year, and overnight, massage parlours will become legitimate businesses with less regulatory oversight than tattoo parlours. The state government has decided to push all of the problems of the sex industry onto local government, while weakening even further than now council's ability to tackle pimps and prostitution entrepreneurs. This is in spite of the passing last year, as you all know, of the Local Government Act of 2020, which sets out in massive great detail the governance that must be followed by councils. No such respect for democracy, however, is exercised by the state government in deciding to deregulate Victoria's sex industry. In fact, some serious mistruths have been circulated in order to justify this decision, such as the lie that sex industry deregulation in New South Wales has been a success. This is blatantly false, given that a New South Wales Parliamentary Committee in 2015 recommended precisely that licensing be introduced in that jurisdiction because local government wasn't coping with deregulation and the sex industry had been infiltrated by organised crime. In New Zealand too, which partly deregulated its sex industry in 2003, the City of Christchurch, the year after, in 2004, held a public consultation that attracted 1,500 submissions and 52 speakers, 61% of whom felt that brothels should be allowed only within the central business district. When this restriction was enacted as a bylaw, it was challenged in court by a local pimp and overturned the following year. This meant that legislation deregulating prostitution nationally supported goals of sex industry entrepreneurs locally that were at odds with the wishes of residents. Exactly the same outcome is expected throughout Victoria as a result of the state government's proposal to override the authority of local government and push the problems of the sex industry onto residents who are concurrently robbed of the power to deal with them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Norma, for your presentation. We do have a question of clarification and just reminding no preambles to those questions, councillors, please. So I've got Councillor Watson, followed by Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you for your presentation. In talking about the legislation, I was wondering if you could answer the question, given that you mentioned it, are there any safeguards in the new legislation that will help ameliorate the human trafficking problem?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Obviously, it's a repeal bill that will be passed. So the Victorian government is proposing to both repeal the Sex Work Act as we have it, plus any provisions in other laws that they see as restricting the activities of the sex industry in any way. And so we currently have a legislative model that does not introduce any safeguards to detect trafficking crime, and the reason I say that is because Victoria Police was barred from the industry once the Sex Work Act was passed in 1994 with a different name, passed in 1994. In 2011, yes, Victoria Police were newly allowed back in to monitor the licensed part of Victoria's sex industry, but there was no, obviously no going forward with trafficking prosecutions since then till the current day. So no, my answer would be no. In the statements that the Victorian government has made so far, there appears to be zero safeguards in place to detect the crime of trafficking.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Any further questions, Councillor Watson?
No.
Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Mayor. Mine's not a question of clarification per se. I was wondering, Ms. Norma, if you might be able to email me with your contact details. Your presentation was exceptional and I'd like to follow up.
Thank you very much. I'll do so.
Thank you. And I think for all presenters this evening, they can email councillors their presentations. I've got Councillor Stavrou. Councillor Stavrou.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Norma, for an exceptional presentation. Just as a simple way, my thinking is that the way that the government is approaching this, it looks like there's some issues to drive parallels with the code of driving law. There are issues with speed limits and there are potential some accidents, and their solution is to remove the speed limit completely and say that there are no more accidents due to the speed limit. Is that how you would characterise it in this industry, given your expertise?
It's exactly how I would characterise it, and even worse. Already local councils in Victoria are mostly robbed of the ability to enact any controls or punitive action against any sex industry businesses in their jurisdictions. You're already faced with that. According to the statements of the Victorian government, you'll be left with even fewer resources at your disposal in order to enact any controls over the industry at all. So not only, it's a double-layered thing where the Victorian government both completely deregulates the sex industry to a more extreme extent than New South Wales, a more extreme extent than New Zealand, or is proposing to do so, at the same time as further encroaching upon the authority of local government by taking away your powers. So it's even worse than the speed limit parallel, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stavrou. We'll just get some governance advices to the previous speakers. It appears that we've heard from all of our speakers this evening. Unfortunately, we've had a couple of speakers that had some technical difficulties that we can't contact. So to all of those that have done a presentation tonight, we very much thank you for your views that you've expressed to us. Understanding this is a very challenging topic for many parts of our community, and it has a diversity of views on it. So I thank you all again for your this evening presentation to all councillors.